Bam.
This is John Green, and you are watching the Break It Down show.
Yeah, look, this is what we do. Nobody does Afghanistan like we do around here, John, as you well know, because, well, look, guys like us, we did it at a level that I would say is elite professional grade, right? You can go to training, go to Tigerland, you can go to NTC, and all that stuff you learn there is good Army training. And I'm doing that like to be kind of mocking it, but it's also true. You know, learning how to jab a needle in an arm, great. Learning how to do bounding overwatch, great. You know, doing an interview or two if you're a spy at a coffee shop, great. You know, but to do what we did well, right? To be exceptional, and everybody thinks they're exceptional here. Here's part of the problem. Here's one of the reasons why you know that we didn't do well is if you and I to go in a room and we say, hey, all of you service members, were you better than average at working in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? All the hands would go up. Were you all awesome at working with interpreters? All the hands would go up, right? But the reality is this stuff's hard. And so I was curious how you developed your tool set. You've been a lot. You were there as a commander. You were there as a contractor. You were there as a DOD civilian. You've done it all. Let's talk a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of skill sets that I think are required for someone to be successful at this sort of work. And what I mean by this sort of work is building personal relationships with, in this case, Afghans. It could be any partner where the United States is operating in any country, but there are skill sets that enable some to do better than others when it comes to eliciting information and building rapport. And so those are the keys to any relationship with a person, right? Is you have to have rapport. And so the Army seemed to think that you could just take a guy or a girl, send them to maybe a 3-month, if they were lucky, or 6-month school, and they would give them the tools to be successful, to build rapport with a local partner, to elicit information that would be meaningful to help the U.S. government in its decision-making process. For me, I spent years as an attorney, and attorneys elicit information from clients. Attorneys attempt to convince people to see a dynamic one way or another. And so I had years of elicitation experience built into me. I also was an older guy. We had a lot of 25 to 30-year-old people who were trying to do this sort of stuff, and they just don't have a lot of life experience. They might not have kids. They may have grown up in the city. We were, for the most part, working out in the country. I grew up in the country, so I could sit down and talk to somebody about what it's like to raise cattle, to raise sheep, to raise goats, to grow crops, to do all those sorts of things. And so having some common past background with the people that you're working with matters. The DOD doesn't care about that. They're just going to take a person and they're going to plug them into a seat and they're going to spit out somebody who they say is qualified. And so there are a lot of aspects to the art, not so much the science, that matter. How artful are you? And again, as an older guy, I also knew the most important thing in any relationship that you're successful with is to actually listen to the other person. So I was willing to listen. Go ahead, over.
No, I was like, wait, listen to the other person. I was just feigning, incredulity,
Yeah, but you got to listen to the other guy. And our commander will have an agenda. They want to achieve excellence.
Yeah.
And that agenda is fed and built based upon input from a bunch of Americans who have a desire. We call it a desired end state. They have a goal they want to reach.
Right.
And one of the things that, as an older guy, I've been involved in politics. So the question is the platform you are selling to the people you're trying to convince to vote for you a platform that resonates with them? And in the Army, they never ask that question. They just develop a plan. They go, this is what we're going to do. Now go do that plan. They don't ever ask whether or not that plan is actually going to work. If you're dependent on the population to work with them, it's going to work with the population. So in Afghanistan, we pitched a set of values, a set of ideals to a rural, I call them a set of urban values to a rural population for 20 years. And that rural population never bought into any of that stuff. If you grow up in New York City, you will see the world differently than a person who grows up in Goodrich, Texas. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
Goodrich got
Yeah.
5 people in it, okay? And New York City has 17 million in the greater area. You're going to see the world differently. I just got back from New York City. I got a dozen friends who live there. None of them own a car. They don't own a car because they take the subway and because of population density. And so therefore they support high taxes on fuel. But the people in Goodrich, Texas have to drive 30 miles to get gas, to get food, to get whatever the heck they want to get,
Yeah. Yeah.
clothes. So high taxes on gas don't work for them. And so that's an example of how we pushed a, relatively speaking, progressive urban-based agenda on a bunch of rural people, and we see what happened after 20 years. We didn't listen to the people out in the sticks.
I want to jump in here. So you talk about one of the things I learned how to do is how to speak commander, right? Because when guys like us show up, they don't know how to use us. They don't know where to put us in the order of battle. They've never been taught, right? And so what I learned from the commanders, I talked to them because I started to build rapport and trust with those guys, because if you didn't have that, you were irrelevant. And too many people in our field, they were like, I'm like, are you guys even relevant here? They're like, yeah. I'm like, they just took a unit photo. You weren't in it.
Yeah.
You know, the boss went to a funeral yesterday. I was there with my boss. You weren't in it.
Yeah.
So how important are you to your commander, right? And so I realized that every commander has 4 basic principles. And everybody's heard me say this, but the military doesn't hear it. So I'm going to say it again. Close and destroy the enemy. Protect the force. Enable the enablers. Teach and train the host nation people, right? And then, so the commander will say, I wonder, and everybody grabs their pen and they start to write down what the commander wonders. But the reality is, if it doesn't fit into those 4 things, you don't have to worry about it. I don't need the commander. I learned I don't need the commander to task me, right? If they have basic questions, like a great one was, Pete, how come they won't take our aid? Okay, I can work with that. You know, that's not an I wonder question. That's like, hey, help me. I have these tools and I can't put them to work, and it's affecting my 4 main things, right? But we're never taught that. We're never taught how to. And the commanders taught, this is a great thing, and I'm going to shut up and let you talk, but the commanders taught me a great thing. They're like, look, we're all the same guy. You know, we're all been on the same path. We have the same kind of energy in our career. And so you can treat us, all us battalion brigade commanders, pretty much the same way. One, we all love Napoleon. So you can always say to us this quote, audacity, 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 always audacity. And it'll resonate with us because we're retards for that stuff. And what that did for me was I could go up there and say, listen, I'm Pete. I'm new, but I'm not new at this. I'm really good at it. And you're going to put me under a captain, probably in the 3 shop, because that's what happens. That's totally fine. You'll learn pretty quick what I do. About 3 weeks, you'll see what my reports do. And then in about 3 months, you're going to look at me and say, Pete, you're the most valuable guy I have. You're the force, like my number 1 force multiplier, and we couldn't have done this without you. And then you're going to give me open access to your couch. And they look at me like, whoa. And then all I need from you is access to patrols, you know, and I'll create all this stuff. And they're like, all right, where do you want to go? You know, wherever you have your most questions, where's your hardest problem? Yeah. And they would deploy me, right? And that's how you speak commander. So you can start to, from my point of view and how I do it, you could start to flip that around and come in from the other direction and say, this is what the Afghans need. This is what the Iraqis want. This is their plan. How do we work within it? Because the one thing I learned, and I learned it towards the end, was there's only room for 1 sword in the scabbard, right? Can't be 2 bosses. Can only be 1 boss. Who's the boss? Is it going to be you, sir? Or is it going to be that governor? All right, I'm shutting up.
Yeah. No. So, you know, if for Americans, you know, if you work in construction, you have to speak construction. If you work in oil and gas, you got to speak oil and gas. If you want to do construction in Africa, in a colony that used to be run by the French, you need to speak construction and French. And so the U.S. Army doctrine, you have to understand Army, Marine, joint doctrine. You got to understand those things to do the job that we do, because that's the lexicon that our client uses. And DOD is our client. The commander's your client. Even if you're an Army lieutenant, your client's your commander. Now, there's this whole doctrine on partner-based operations. And it tells you how you're supposed to work with a partner. A partner is a non-military person. So if you're going to go to any country, you're going to work with partners. You have to understand the incentives that the partners or or the dynamic within which the partner is living and operating, so you can understand incentives and disincentives. You have to speak their language or have access to their language. And then you also have to speak your client's language. And you have to translate. You're a translator of information between your client and the partner. You're translating all the time. And so
now, did you ever look at the partner as the client as well? Because that was my gold standard. If I got the Afghan or the Iraqi general, whoever to go, Pete is my advisor. Now I'm working at a level that literally no one else in the country is getting to.
Yeah. So there is, you absolutely can do it that way and be successful that way. They used to say all roads lead to Rome. I've taken that and I say there are many roads to Mecca. Okay.
Yeah.
You get there all kinds of ways because that's the art, because we don't really have the doctrine that's perfect, but that's art.
True.
Yeah, that's the art. And so I didn't so much look at them as my client. They were the to use the counterinsurgency term, right, or the insurgency term, that was the ocean within which I was swimming, and they were the fish, right? That I really kind of had more of that perspective. And my job was to help my client, DoD, realize its desired end state. Now, in order to do that, frequently you have to slap your client with reality, and you have to it's called expectation management, right? You got to wake your client up with action. And the thing about, in economics, so back in the day, I studied a lot of economics, we make decisions based upon the information we have on hand at the time, not based on the information we want to have, but the information we do have on hand at the time we have to make a call. So the way that I got my client to understand that I added value was I said, I'm going to feed you information that no one else can feed you. And I'm going to illustrate for you how incentives and disincentives will work with this population, with this partner that we want to work with, because you can't get anything done unless you convince the partner. So there's this whole by, with, and through doctrine that the U.S. Army has, and they teach people that, but 99% of the people who go to the schoolhouse, they don't give an F about it, and they don't really learn it, and they don't really believe it. And they don't believe it because Americans are impatient. We are an impatient lot. We budget on a 1-year budget. We plan operations on a 1-year plan. So a battalion commander goes, I'm coming into this space and I have my objectives, and there are 15 things I have to accomplish, and I have a year to do it. I'm in a hurry. So sometimes you have to sit down and go, sir, what you want to do, you're just not going to get done this year. And oh, by the way, when you made your plan a year ago to come here, because you had bad information at the time, you now have a plan that's not going to work. So I'm going to give you information that will enable you to be successful, and you can tweak your plan, and you can articulate to other people in your own little group why you're doing what you're doing. So like you said, you sat down with your boss and were able to get him to understand how you were going to add value to him. The way I did it was I said, I'm going to feed you information nobody else can give you. And in order to be able to feed you that information, I have to be out in space, which means every single day.
Every day. You cannot put me out there enough. Right.
I'm going to leave before the sun comes up, and I'm going to leave after the sun comes down, unless I got something going on at night, in which case I'm going to be out till whenever I'm out, right? So you have to have access to space. A good operator will find multiple ways to get access to space. So if you need to roll with civil affairs on Monday and roll with PAO on Tuesday and roll with an infantry with a combat patrol on Thursday and Friday and roll with an ag development team on another day and then hop out with some Navy dudes on the next day, that's what you do. So you have to network internally in order to enable yourself to be external and collect that information and feed it back. So one of the most important things we had was, we called it butts and seats. Got to be able to got to have a seat to put a butt in. And because the military doesn't just go out and do stuff. We had things called min-force requirements. With those min-force requirements, it meant, for example, in order for an Army patrol to go out at a certain point in time, they had to have 16 guys, 16 people with weapons. They had to have 2 cruise-served weapon systems. And so that means 16 seats are available in 4 vehicles to go outside. So you needed to capture 1 or 2 of those seats. And in order to do that, you had to add enough value to get that seat dedicated for you, because civil affairs wants that seat, PAO wants that seat, ag development wants that seat, the chaplain wants that seat, the sergeant major wants that seat. You got to show how you add more value than those cats do.
Embedded reporters,
Yeah.
DVIDs,
Yeah.
combat camera. I mean, I can keep
Oh,
going fingers. Oh, by the way, interpreters, just it's a
yeah.
lot of, you have to have value on that. And you're right about that. The butts and seats things. And if it's a walking patrol still, like, what are you going to do on that patrol? Because that commander, probably a captain, probably a lieutenant, they want to know where you're going to lay down on the ground in a firefight and what you're going to provide. And you're like, I'm not doing that. Matter of fact, I don't even have a gun on this patrol. I might, but I might not, like that's not the role that I play here. And also, and you and I have talked about this, about the battle captain. Hey, if I'm going to be off the camp, do you want to know about this? No, I don't. And so there's like, out in space, right? With no real look, we're not going to get into a firefight. Guys like us, we can't get into a firefight because we're not going to walk out of it alive. Maybe have something to point back and say, hey, we're all leaving, but we have to get out with our mouth. That's the only way to do it reliably.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. So it's I talked about rapport a little while earlier. The U.S. military has always, competing interests in a decision-making process. Force protection, you talked about one of the things commander always cares about is force protection. So one of the force protection things that a commander does is he says, everybody will wear body armor. Everybody will have a helmet. Everybody will put on safety glasses. No kidding. We go to war with safety glasses. Everybody will wear gloves. Everybody. So we're all, everyone's heard about the stormtrooper, right? American soldiers look like the stormtrooper. They got all the stuff on and they come in. They got a bunch of gear and they have their weapon. They have so much gear that they're puffed out and they kind of rest their weapon on their chest, that kind of thing. Well, if you walk, let's see, I put it this way. If the Mexican army came into the United States, into San Antonio, Texas, no, not San Antonio, they went into Iowa. For whatever reason, they showed up in Iowa and they set up a camp with 4,000 dudes on. And 15 of those guys came out of that camp. They walked into your cafe at 9 o'clock in the morning when you're having your coffee. And they sat down with all their gear on and they started talking to you. And they had all this stuff on. Do you want to talk to that guy and tell him anything at all? And the answer generally is no. You're terrified or at least worried about who he is and what he's going to do. And that's what we did. We showed up in this very foreign space, this very different place, and we would walk around and guys would ask questions. Really great. We'd give them cards, right? Do you know where the bad guy is? Taliban hiding. Can you help me? Of course, nobody's going to tell you what the heck is going on because, of course, their cousin's the Taliban. They don't even like their cousin, okay? They hate their cousin. He's a jerk. But he's a Taliban, and I'm not going to turn my cousin into some dude from 8,000 miles away who I don't know. So you need to look like you are non-threatening. You're non-threatening. So you put your little polo shirt on, and you wear your little khaki pants, and you have your little book, and you have some Poindexter pins in, and you walk out, and you're non-threatening. You don't have all the stuff on, and then maybe you can build rapport with somebody. And the way you do that, I'm telling you, you want to know how to build rapport with an Afghan? Be an electrician. And go, no, I'm an electrician. Let's talk about how to do that wiring that's all jacked up. And you start to build rapport about something that you have common interest in, which is how all human relationships are built, right? Raiders fans meet at the airport and become Raiders buddies because they're Raiders fans. They talk about common things. They don't just talk about these unique or these kind of weird external kind of concepts. They talk about things that are common. And so you need to be non-threatening in appearance. You need some sort of commonality with the person that you're talking about, which means you can't send a 22-year-old kid to do this if he's going to talk to a 50-year-old guy. The 50-year-old guy is just going to look at him like his grandson, and he'll talk to him about what it's like to have a grandson. But that's as good as you're going to get, man. As good as it's going to happen. So I was always amazed at who the Army selected. They select a lot of anthropologists, right? And I'm just like, okay. You're going to talk about tribes, but at a certain point in the ballgame, people are sick of talking about tribes. And they just want to talk about life, They want to talk about life. And at a certain point, they're going to want to stop talking about women's rights or, how do the women bake the bread? Or what role do women have in the culture? And they're going to want to talk about just normal things that happen in their village. So You know, if it were up to me, we would have a standing force of people who actually have real world experience before they're ever eligible to even apply to do a job like this. And it's got to be the sort of experience that will resonate with somebody in a less developed world, right? In a less developed world. So, or something that'll add value to them. That's my rant.
I'm going to throw a couple of pictures up to go with your rant. And listen, I made all the mistakes. So when I show you these things, there's a mastery in the pictures that you see. And I'm not the guy that I was before, right? So here's what John's talking about. There's me and some sheikhs. These guys are farmers. And you look at me and how I'm dressed, and then you look at my interpreter. He's got to do that because that's his job, is to wear all that stuff and everything. But I'm just, and look behind me on the ground. There's my battle. As soon as I get there, I drop my shit. I'm like, we're going to be here for a minute. And then I start talking to these guys, and I talk to them at their level. By the way, that guy I'm talking to directly, he died about 3 months later. So these guys are in a dangerous place. We didn't kill him in this time. Look at you talking about rapport, right? I wanted to talk to these guys. You see behind me, there's a little jug of fuel there, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted to talk to these guys about how they were making their money selling fuel and are they bad guys or not? And I'm like, hey, man, I love these motorcycles. Can I check it out? Because it's like a pickup truck motorcycle. And then that's Ali on the front, you know, part of Iraq's Alabama band, you know, and you get like, okay, these are Shia dudes, you know, and you talk to them like that. Now, look, in this case, we're on the side of a road, so I can't take all my gear off, right? But I'm trying to, like, everybody wants to show off their cool motorcycle pickup truck to the American that shows up if you're not a dick to people, right? And when we talk about rapport and building trust, there's no doctrine for this. They just say do it. The Army just says, first you build rapport, then you build trust, and then you ask them for everything. And I wanted to accentuate your point about young guys. So a lieutenant, and for the people watching, a lieutenant might be 21 to say 24 years old, right? This person sits down, and so the commander's like, hey, my commander says, hey, Pete, will you go with Lieutenant Armstrong, making this name up so I can protect the dude. He's got a partner. It doesn't seem to be going well, and I don't have time to go do that crap. So I watch a lieutenant engage a 50-year-old man. So you have a man that's half the age of a general, right? This is a general, and he's got his stuff on his desk, and it's all neatly arranged as if he knows what he's doing, right? He's got a desk and he's running it. And he's sitting there and he's fiddling with papers and clearly like just trying to occupy his mind because this lieutenant is asking him for like, I'm going to need you to set up a time to talk about the parade that we're going to do. And so I'm looking and I have to let the whole process play out. You know, I have to let the whole process play out. And so afterwards I'm like, hey, sir, my boss, I need to go back and talk to that general without anybody else around so I can start to patch that up a little bit and assess the damage. And two, you may want to chill your lieutenant out because he's object fixated. He's like, I've been given task A to go accomplish project B, and I will do that. And it's like, there's no subtlety. There's nothing. It's just a blunt force thing. And he hadn't earned that right. And I'm going to say one more thing about all this stuff. When we're learning about partnering, we don't understand that the same dude, we went into a room and they were watching, Arab Cup soccer. And this is the Arabs World Cup. And these guys are bananas for it, and Iraq is playing. And he wants to go do work on the night when Iraq is playing. And I'm like, no, our work right now is cheering for Iraq. Let's sit down. Let's have a great time. You know? Yeah,
so there's that high tech. So this is how Westerners do it, right? There's that high context, low context communication, right? And that's describing. It's funny. That's how you have to describe this dynamic to an American chucklehead, to get them to understand what you're talking about. Oh, I understand now. You know, we're talking about a high context culture, right? Which means you got to read all the body cues. You need to build rapport. You need to get to know them for, months before you ask anything that really matters, right?
And the Army's the opposite. The Army's low context are like, before going to the bathroom, you will drop your ammo belt.
Yeah, we're Western. That's how we are. So that's just I've seen it so many times. Now, you know, I do want to say this in defense of young people, and that is they can teach you a lot. You know, so I talk about, you need to be experienced and you need to have all this stuff. I'm going to tell you, I learned a lot from lieutenants who just, the phrase out of the mouths of babes, right? So So we were trying to get the Afghans to, I'll just say, go on a patrol, go up into the mountains, and do some violent stuff. And every time it got time to go, their vehicles had broken, something had happened, and they couldn't come. They clearly did not want to go up in the hills and tussle with these guys. And the one day that we finally got them all ready to go, like half of the ANA was just totally baked, man. They were high. And I looked at this Marine lieutenant, and I'm like, man, these are your dudes, and it is your responsibility at some point in the ball game to be able to, kind of lead, coax, coerce your partner to go execute this operation. What's going on? Everybody's baked. And he just looked at me and he goes, John, do you know how crappy their life is? I went, yeah. He goes, if I had their crappy life, I would be baked every day too. And I went, excellent point. Excellent point. And so, they do, if they get a little experience, they see, they observe, it all kind of goes in together and can end up being great guys to work with. So I don't want to totally bash on younger generation's ability to operate in that kind of space, right? They just need experience, right?
There's no one more adaptable than
mentor.
Than infantry officer. A young infantry officer can learn anything if we bother to teach them. The other thing that's a problem, and I want to have you talk about it a little bit, is we come up with these concepts. I call it in the spaceship. It's not like the 1 over 50,000 view. It's the 1 over the world view, right? So you're out here in like low Earth orbit, and you're like, here are the questions that we have, and that's why, like, I always mock it like I'm a Nazi. Like, you can't walk into town and go, "Wo ist the bombs?" Because they're never going to tell you where the bombs are. They're just never going to do it. It's ridiculous, right? So you have to understand that those people are in that ship are desperate for what I have, for what you have, that ground truth, but they have to also believe it. And so that commander is like, if you could just get me some ground truth, I can lead this thing. I just have no idea what's going on out there,
So that's true. Another thing that pops into my brain is Americans are uncomfortable with, how to put it, we are uncomfortable with the notion of factions. We want everybody equal. We want everybody to get along. And so, we have laws against racial profiling. We have laws against also, we have anti-discrimination laws, right? We have all kinds of anti-discrimination laws, which for us are great. We need those laws, and we are a developed enough space where we can have that sort of, we can develop and engender and further that sort of culture. But in places that are poor, for example, there's no such thing as full and open competition for a job, which means you have to hire your family member. Why? I got a job, I got to give it to my brother, man. Even though my brother's not the best guy at this thing, I got to give it to him because my family needs to make the money. I can't afford to give it to somebody who's not in my family. So we're operating in this space where if you're going to get information from somebody, you have to find a group that is already predisposed to be opposed to whoever you're opposed to. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. You have to find those groups who have a natural incentive or a predisposed incentive to help you to hurt them, or to shape and force the opposition into the corner that you want to shape them into. And so that's difficult for a lot of Americans to wrap their noggin around. We actually pass laws that say, hey man, you can't partner with a group because they've engaged in war crimes. Well, I hate to tell you this, they're the only group that's opposing the people we're fighting. Right. And so if you go into a village to talk to somebody to try to find out what the bad guys are doing, we're going to call them the bad guys. What the Army will call them the threat. See, the Army is so politically correct now. The threat. So if we're going to find out what the bad guys are up to, we're going to have to work with someone who's opposed to the bad guys, because the friends of the bad guys are never going to talk to us. So we have to build partnerships with people who are opposed to the opposition. And that means sometimes it's messy. I was reading the other day, there are always articles that came out once a year about American soldiers were told to ignore Afghans' sexual behavior with juveniles. Hey, man, that's their culture. That's their culture. And if the U.S. wants to say, in order to operate in that space, we have to follow American laws on all this stuff, then we just might as well quit being there.
Right.
Just quit being there.
That's so true.
A newspaper reporter is not going to get that. They're not going to care. And a person who is an advocate for people in that position, they're not going to care. But we have competing interests.
And we're also not trained to deal with that appropriately.
We're not. Absolutely.
We might get ourselves blown up on the next patrol. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, you're right. You're spot on. So in the U.S., we have, everything is about internal politics. It's all our policies in Afghanistan were derivative of our own internal politics.
Right.
In order to convince certain Congress people to vote for funding operations at a certain level, they had to be given certain promises. Hey, we will have a program to dig a well in every village. We'll have a program to teach people how to grow not just sorghum, but this type of sorghum because it's from Nebraska. So we end up doing this kind of weird stuff. We're like, you're just like on, yeah, okay. Well, we got to get this done in the next year because, the budget runs out next year and we want to get refunded. And so it's just, it ends up being, it's never simple.
It's never simple. Yeah. And part of what makes these things less simple is that we don't bother to understand what the ground truth is, right? We have these beliefs, these Western beliefs, and I call it ethical saturation. And you reach a point of you can only do the right thing to a point, and then the right thing is the wrong thing because you can't do the right thing in a conflict zone all the time, right? It's too much.
But it also bumps into their culture.
Right. Well, that too, and that's part of the thing. Like, so we're going to empower females, and you end up getting females killed, whipped, enslaved because you're there trying to empower them, and you're doing it with no tools at all. Like no one's trained how to do this, and in reality, you're there to collect intel, not empower. I'm sorry, but please continue.
No, but you trigger a counteraction, right?
Right.
They call it reactionary movement, right? You trigger reactionaries to do something. So I think we talked about this before. Back in the day, some person came up with the idea to have a woman's poetry contest in Khost province, which is right on the Pak border, far removed from Kabul. It's culturally distant from Kabul and the kind of educated intelligentsia that most Americans work with when they hang out in Kabul, right? So they were going to have a women's poetry contest. Every Afghan on the planet said this is bad, to the locals, said this is a bad idea to put young women in a bazaar and have them openly read poetry about their life experience to a crowd of onlookers. That's how they wanted to do it. It just wasn't done by Zoom. This is pre-COVID, right? It wasn't done by Zoom. And sure enough, the girls went out there to read their poetry, and Haqqani, those ruthless sons of guns, because they are ruthless. There are no Ruths in their group. They sent a suicide bomber, and he blew the place up, killed a bunch of young girls, because some American thought it was a good idea to have a poetry reading contest in that space. And so, yeah, it's tough, man.
You think about that as a parent back again to Iowa with the Mexican army there, and the Mexican army's like, hey, bro, I'm going to go read poetry in this coffee shop. And that coffee shop gets blown up, and your kid was in it, or your neighbor's kid was in it.
Oh, yeah.
So
you've now flipped to the other side, right?
Right. Or at least found someone who's absolutely not. So there's people that will not cooperate. There's people that will do what's called satisficing behavior, where they'll like perform the action like, well, of course my kid's going to school, right? Satisficing. And then you have all of these values that are negative that are created to pacify you in some way, right? And so you have these performances that if you're someone like us, where we've watched these units do it, you're like, hey, are they really doing this? And then, Pete's master trick was, I'm just going to go back 3 days later and I'm going to see what happened here, and it's like, aha, this was a performance. There are no kids in this school. Matter of fact, this is a liquor store. How can that be a liquor store? Or whatever. And these are the things that we miss because we get so in love, John, with what we do. So when the commander comes to you and is like, I just need to know what the hell's going on. I looked at the unit more than anything. I always look at it like an equation, right? I'm trying to balance the equation. And like, if we can get our mistakes reduced, right? I would look at the briefings. Here comes a PowerPoint slide. Here's what we're going to do. Here's our quad slide. Here's how we're doing on it. And I would look at these things and I would say, you guys are so far off base. I could see it in their communication. So I could start to address these fallacies and go, that's not accurate. That's not accurate. This for sure is not accurate. And I could start to tear these things apart so that the unit is like, Jesus Christ, we're doing a lot of things the wrong way. I hadn't even worked on the Afghans yet or the Iraqis yet because I had to get us to stop being so stupid, you know?
Yeah, you're talking about quality assurance, that's what Americans would call it, right?
Yeah.
Quality. Uh, what's the QAS? What's the quality assurance surveillance program? But you know, at the Army calls it measures of effectiveness. Right there. What's your measure of effectiveness? How do you know you're effective? We're not so good at determining whether or not what we're doing is effective. Uh, we, you know, a better starting point rather than inserting yourself into a space and saying, "Hey, we want to do these 88 things," is to insert yourself into a space and then just start building relationships with people, and then let them know what you can do, and then when they come to you for help, then help them, rather than going out and saying we're gonna or we can't. You know, just let them come to you, because when the population is opting out, they're opting to not build relationships with you, there's a reason they're choosing to not accept your aid, and that frequently is that they're terrified to associate with you or ally with you, because you actually can't keep them alive. You can't guarantee their safety. You know, patrolling into a village for 2 hours a day, you know, you show up for 30 minutes here, disappear, come back 30 minutes later. That is not the same as being present in that village. If you want to secure a village from the Taliban, Haqqani, or Hig, you have to live in that village. You got to live in it. And we never chose to live in villages. We built combat outposts and we hung out on our combat outposts. And then we would go do some patrols and things like that. Soft tried VSO, Village Stability Ops, for a while, and that stuff is successful. Those people can buy into what you're selling because you're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But the Afghan is always looking at the American going, yeah, but how long are you really here for? So you talk about satisficing, right? My first week in a place called Kapisa Province, civil affairs went out. Winter was coming, so they delivered a bunch of rice, a bunch of cooking oil, a bunch of blankets, and a bunch of cold weather clothes to the locals. Right? They went into this village. They had a big deal. They dropped off. Everybody got like 5 gallons of cooking oil, 5 pounds of rice, all kinds of stuff like that. So that happened at say 10 o'clock in the morning. Everybody, they were done by noon. Everybody bolted and they left. The patrol left. So we went about a mile down the road. Some of us hopped out. We went out, set up an OP, and we watched the village. The Afghan National Army rolled in about an hour later, and they took everything back that we had just handed out. And then they drove off, right? They drove off to go sell it. And you know, that was typical of Americans who were interested in the measure of performance. And of course, when they went back, you know, the CA dudes went back a week later and said, "How's it all going?" Everybody said, "Oh, it's fine, it's great," because they're not going to tick off the local commander, right? Nope. That's just going to show up and crack them on the head. And so we got no buy-in from the villagers before we gave them this stuff. We just said, "We're going to give you this stuff," right? And so they didn't have the phrase is they didn't have any skin in the game. They had no skin in the game. And if we had some Afghans who had skin in the game, they would have told the A&A commander, "No, bro, you can't have our stuff."
Yeah.
Right. But we come and we go. And structure. We had systematic failure.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about these distros that we would do, because nobody asks the Afghans. There's no buy-in, like you say. We never set this up like, "Hey, come down to the government center if you want oil. Hey, farmers, why don't we get together? We have this resource. Why don't you guys figure out with your governor how you want to work it, and then just tell us what to do, and we're just going to say yes and do it." And so Pete would show up, and they would say, "Oh, we're going to do wheat seed distro, wheat and all. Everybody's going to get wheat and all. Everybody going to. No one's going to starve this winter." Like, well, first off, are they hungry? Are they starving? Yeah. Is this the right kind of rice? Do they not eat that kind of rice here in this valley? Would it be better off just buying a bunch of goats from that farmer over there? You know, there's 100 things we can do and ask. And so this is when Pete says affect dominates effect, right? So you went out and did the mission. You absolutely handed out the stuff. People went, yay, and they had the stuff. And then you go back and you're like, what happened? They're like, well, you know, the Afghan army are a bunch of jerks. They stole all that stuff back from us. And, you know, the government doesn't do anything. And you guys kind of make our lives harder. And so the affect is misery, dejection, defeat, rejection, all these things. These are terrible affects, right? You can't. Yeah, and so this is what I would do. I would be like, okay, you're going to do this. Well, we've done this a million times, and so we should be good at this by now, right? This is 10 years in. This is 20 years in. This is 5 years in. How many times do we got to do this thing? And I went through a wheat seed distro, and there was this assumption by this full colonel, and I blew him up, and he wanted to kick me out of theater. So we went 06 to 06 to 06, and they were like, hey, this guy's got to go. And then my boss took an ass chew and just said these words: was Pete wrong about any of it?
Yeah.
And then the DCO knew it. He's like, God damn it. Because what they had assumed was that this guy was corrupt. He was Taliban. He was going to steal all this money. I sat there and watched him go through the process. I walked him through the whole process. You know, the Afghan, so just for the audience, there's an Afghan minister for agriculture. And then there's a sub guy down at the county level, and he's called the Dale. Well, we didn't have a Dale. And so the Afghan minister for the state was going to have to bring this stuff out to us. And he wasn't going to do that because he's a city guy, and we are deep in the rugged, hard-ass country. And it would take an army patrol to come out and bring this stuff. We were provisioned via airdrop. And so my governor is like, hey, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to gather some money from these farmers. We're going to carpool that stuff in. I got a truck. We'll put it in there. We'll bring it out. And then we've already talked, and you want to know about all the villages that are outlying. What we're going to do is we're going to send a bunch of messages out to all these areas, and I'll list all these villages that we have contact with, and we'll see what the response is. And as a community, we're going to decide which farmers need this stuff the most. And then the army, as I'm doing this, Army's like, make sure they don't have to eat it. Don't eat this. The seed is rust resistant. Don't let them. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I'll ask this question. John, you're laughing because you and I both know. So I'm like, hey, we're not supposed to let you guys eat this seed. And they're like, yeah, we're not dumb. First off, we're farmers. Second, not our first rodeo with you guys with this. And just so you know, it says on the side, don't eat it. It's got images. It's got words. We get it. And I'm like, okay, I love to write these things down. You know, shut up about don't eat it. And so we did it. We pulled it off. And I'm like, who got the grain? And he's like, well, this guy. What was their story? And he gave me all the story. And look, the guy can make it up and lie all he wants. But the reality is we were buddies. We were bros. And he was like, this is why we did it this way. And then I went out to the farmers and I'm like, hey, what happened during that wheat seed district? Oh, you know what? And then they each had a story that matched the person. I identified each gift. And it wasn't that much grain, so it wasn't that hard to do. But then the colonel on the other end's like, that guy's a criminal. He sold it. He's a grifter. It's like, first off, he has no budget. Second, your ag, because he was the ag team boss, right? Your ag partner wouldn't come out, Yeah. So there's bigger problems than this guy. But this is the whole thing with that was you have these things where this is supposed to help, and look at how much chaos it caused. It almost got me kicked out of theater. I had a good boss who was willing to take an ass chewing.
Yeah, there's a lot of about being a do-gooder, right? The Americans think they can always make it better. And here's the dynamic I bumped into with guys in the hinterland was they've been farming for 1,000 years and they know what they're doing. And the city boy shows up with a new strain of seed. Right. And that's all cool. But if it doesn't work, the whole village starves to death. And the city boys back in Kabul drinking chai and, eating naan, and life is good. And so a lot of these well-intended programs just, again, were not predicated upon local buy-in, just showed up to do stuff. And then later the ag development team started to try to have, farms. They would have scientific farms they would set up so people could watch the grain grow for 2 or 3 years and realize that it would work and that they could get more and all kinds of stuff like that. But absent having local buy-in on it, it was more pain. It was more of a pain for the Afghans than it was of a return, right? The return on investment wasn't worth the pain that they had to go through, because part of the pain they had to go through was, well, now I'm enabling you, now I'm working with you guys, which means the bad guys are going to now come visit me. And so the bad guys are going to come visit them at the minimum to tax the additional crop, right? To tax it, to go, hey, you used to get 100, you're getting 150. We want 25 of the extra 150. So that's how you end up with a war. How you end up inserting some sort of resource into the space that enables the opposition to be better positioned than they ever were before. A lot of the time, is leave that alone. They already got this. And people go, yeah, but people are dying. They've been dying for the past years. And that's, we have to be comfortable with that. We had these things called Snickers, snow and ice removal contracts. They were awesome because the Afghans knew that Americans units came in once a year, and every year it would snow. So every year the Afghans and the mountains would go down to the Americans and say, hey man, we're going to have a bunch of people are going to die, and we need trucks that have the bulldozer blade on the front. We need dump trucks to put ice in, and we need this called the Snicker package. So every Snicker package to clear the mountain in a certain place or multiple. And the new save Afghans by preventing avalanches, blah, 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 blah. And, a dump truck will last you 20 years. And that blade will last 50 years. And nobody ever thought to look back and go, hey, man, did you, the previous year, stuff? And so after about 6 iterations of Snicker, finally somebody goes, hey, haven't we done this before? I was here 5 years ago. I think we've already done this. Where's that equipment? And it turned out that the Afghans talked about satisficing, right? They're just looking at an opportunity, man. They're like, if the Americans are this dumb, we'll take advantage. And so they would get a new Snicker package, drive all the new gear to Pakistan and sell it to the Pakistanis. And they were still using the stuff they had from 5 years before, but they kept telling people that there were avalanches and people were dying. And Americans never went up into the mountains to actually check to see how bad the circumstances were. And every year there will be an avalanche and some people will die. There will, because it's a mountainous country and it's the Hindu Kush and it's 3,000 miles of mountain, just going to happen. Well, they take that one event. They say, look at this terrible thing. We need new Snicker. And the Americans were always like, okay, yeah, we can do that. Because Americans think throwing money at a problem fixes a problem. And civil affairs guys had a budget, and they had to be able to go back to their high con who would tell Congress, we spent all that money you gave us to save lives. Doesn't mean they spent it well. Doesn't mean it had the intended effect. But by golly, measure performance, we spent it. Oh, within our fiscal year, we spent it. So that becomes a driver in and of itself, right?
Part of what made me good at the job was realizing that we had this institutional amnesia, right? You talk about the Snicker package, the rehab. Where'd the rehab go? What do you mean rehab? We've never done rehab here before. And I pull up my slide decks. I'm like, here are the last 4 units. Rehab. What do we do? You're the boss. Do whatever you want. But could we maybe try something different? That institutional amnesia also had a cost because, so the example I always use is there was this Iraqi general, and we're basically in his AO. We're in his battle space, and he's coming to the American partner. He's going to be taking over this camp, and they're having a meeting on our camp. And we don't let him on the camp. We sweat him out for hours outside for security reasons, and I guarantee you they patted that general down. And so he was figuratively and literally hot as fucking hell, and he was never going to forgive us. And so I had learned about this thing, right? And so me and my interpreter, we would work on this problem, and we would laugh at the Americans, be like, it's going to be dumb. These guys aren't going to get it. But you think about that. And so we have no institutional memory of what there was anyone there before that they had ever tried these things or had these same problems. We would just come with the same stupid approach, which as a partner has to be exasperating to like constantly hear the same thing. Like, oh, we're gonna work on ag demo farms this year. Like, yeah.
Part of that's, it's a bigger problem. The bigger problem is 1 year rotations. If you want to win, you got to stay for 5 years. You got to stay for 5. And the human has to stay for 5 years if you want to win, because the only way you develop experience in a space that remains relevant is to start and stay for a long enough period of time for it to happen. And the Americans will never do that. We'll never do that because we're concerned about soldiers and Marines' families and things like that. So it's just not ever going to happen. So till we're willing to develop some sort of constabulary force or whatever the heck they're called that will go into those spaces and stay for the duration, it ain't ever going to work. Because why would the partner trust you for just 9 months knowing the next guy might suck? right? Yeah, you might be here for 20 years, but the next guy might suck, and you can keep me alive and you can help me be successful. But the next guy might not care like you care, or they may not be as artful as you are. Or, they could have looked at me and gone, man, you suck. I don't trust you. I want to work with somebody else. And I'm sure in certain circumstances that happened. But yeah, so with regard to institutional amnesia, we're built that way. We enable that to occur because we adopt a policy that you're only going to, you're going to be there for 9 months to a year, and then you're going to come home. We went from 12 months to 9 months because they were decided 12 months was too hard on families. So once you start rocking and rolling, you get in country, it takes you 90 days to figure out what the heck's going on, and even just figure out who you need to know. And then maybe by month 9, you kind of are getting some stuff done. And then month 9, you're getting ready to go home. So there's 6 months of your deployment that is either learning what the heck's going on when compared to your plan that you started with, and then getting ready to go home, which means you only have 6 months of good time. And those partners are just not going to buy in to help you. So do less.
So yes, do less with less. And understand what they want. I'm gonna show a picture. This is for everybody. I love this thing. It's one of the best pieces of work I did. This is a district governor's plan. He put this plan out, and I had to convince the Army that this was real, right? And it's timelined, it's provisioning, it's everything. And then when I got this plan, I scrambled it all up. And then I handed it back to him, and he corrected it and put it back into this order, which was the order he gave it to me originally, right? So he gave me the same order twice. We never do this. We never say, hey, where do you want these ag centers? Do farmers want these distribution points for their stuff? How do they buy? How do they buy and sell their pomegranates or their whatever they grow? We never check these things. And so we tend to think we know what the answer is. And like you said, we come in, we do it. And so what I learned, John, timing wise, right? It would take me, let's say 6 weeks from the RIPTOA, the actual exchange of authority. It would take me 6 weeks to even be able to talk to the unit. I would basically just go into sleep mode. I would still go out. I would still go talk to people because I wanted to maintain my relationships. But it didn't matter if I wrote reports or anything because they weren't set to receive because I wasn't part of the unit. And then they would start to execute their plan. The plan would be all fucked up because it's based on some kind of mystical thing that happened back in the rear. And then by about month 3, the grogginess started to wear off. And they started to understand because now I'm writing reports. Now I'm saying there's a problem here, there's a problem here, there's a problem here. By month 6, they're like, we get it. We're going to do less. We're going to provision less. We're going to work on these things. So I'd gotten John will be back in a second. I'd gotten the ship to come about, right? So we can work on this problem. And then that sweet spot from month 6 to 9 was about where most of the productivity happened because they weren't leaving yet. But in that time, you can only have, let's say 4 real operational wins. You really can't do much more than those 4 wins because these things take months to plan. So we're going to go out and we're going to do a wheat seed distro. Well, you don't just show up and do that. We have to plan it for months and months. If you're going to go out and do let's call it like a job fair where we're going to help people find jobs, help with small business loans, these things take time to plan. And so it's already in the queue and you're trying to get these things done properly. And some of them are already past the point of helping. They're already so far into the planning funnel that they just have to progress and be as good as they are going to be, which is probably not very good. And so you had that window from about 6 months to about 9, 10 months, depending on the unit where they got it. But then they couldn't bite off anything else because they were getting ready to leave. You got to put stuff in boxes, count stuff, put stuff on ships to send back. Everybody's trying to wrap up work, right? And so you really had maybe a 12-week, maybe a 16-week period where you had some opportunity to nudge forward. But the rest of the year, all the other 40 or 30 some odd weeks, you were combat ineffective. And that's no way to run a battle plan is to be out of the loop for, over half of your deployment. And this isn't a knock on the Army or the State Department, but it's just like John, I'm talking about, it's just how things are wired. When you go somewhere and you're desperate to help, you pour your life and your effort and you read books and you're trying to be good at this thing. You don't want to hear that you've done a terrible job. But the reality is we do a terrible job a lot of times, and we have to take that criticism so we can go, how do I do this better? And this is what I was able to do. I was able to stay. I was able to watch a unit, help them evolve, because I'd already seen the mistakes. I'd made the mistakes. I'm like, hey, let's not do what the last unit did. I was here. Let's focus on these things. Hey, help me get to this area because I know there's problems here that we can deal with and address. By the way, I want to know all the bad guys I can find, right? But I need to go out and see these bad guys. I had to let the commander know it's okay for me to go meet bad people, because when we know bad people, we can hopefully prevent bad things from happening, but also maybe get them to come in and talk and deal with us. Anyhow, those are some of the notes that I wanted to throw in here. I think John might have had a battery problem, so I guess I will start to wrap this up. Hey, listen, Dickie is awesome. You're contributing so much. The Koreans, we're going to talk about if everything goes according to plan, we're going to talk about South America specifically and partnering with John McKay in a couple of weeks. So that's coming up, and that'll be awesome. Todd, the turnover that we did even back in the 90s was so bad the U.S. forces never. Yeah, and listen, the exchange, right? The handoffs are terrible. I had a commander say, "This is Pete. You have to listen to him. He's going to help you do the job better." And the guy's like, "All I want to do is do the job better. I'll listen to Pete." And they instantly didn't listen to Pete. They did what they thought they were going to do, and the entire unit still had to come about. And it took time. Ultimately, those guys didn't do it, regretted not doing it, and they lost dudes because of it. And I'm not Superman. I can't save people's lives or anything, but I can say this path is established. It's built well. And if you proceed down it with these things, you'll be better off. These guys were trying to box up stuff and get the hell out of town. And they did. And they lost 3 dudes in an ambush. I mean, we'd done a lot of work to make that place more stable, and it was gone in an instant, because they were leaving and they left too quick. And we didn't even finish half of the things we were supposed to do. Not even half. So so when we're trying to understand why do things collapse so quickly? Because there was no government. There was no long-term success after 20 plus years. Yes. Okay. The military's out and they're patrolling. They're taking on the Taliban. Right. But when they go home, there's no fire trucks. There's no banks. There's no hospitals. There's no, you can't call the police and say, hey, help. You may not even be phones or electricity or running water. There's no sewer system. This is a place that is not established in terms of a stable platform, right? And so when we look at, okay, well, we're going to pull out and leave, of course it goes back to the Taliban, because there's nothing to hold the stability up that we created. Stability operations, it's elastic. And the moment you leave, you let go of the band, and the next guy has to come in and he's got to pull it apart again, right? And so unless we're there, that stability, and we lend to the instability, right? So that's the other confounding factor, is we create instability. All right, well, listen, that's a lot already, and I appreciate you guys listening. Thank you so much for checking out the Break It Down Show. I won't run the thing. Here's how you can help. Go to breakitdownshow.com on the PayPal link right there on top. Go in there and do a monthly subscription. It's a simple thing, but that money I put right back into the show. I mean, there's already a lot of people that do this already, and if you could help me, that would be great, because I will continue to put great content out. We have some, if things go the way I think they're going, we have some really, really, really incredible things about to happen, and you will see what happens when I get into the field, when I'm able to leave the house and go grab shows and get some production. I'm working on getting more production capability because there are so many great stories to tell. How do I fund that stuff? When you guys use that PayPal link and put a little bit of money in. If you're like, hey, Pete, why don't you get a Patreon account? This is my Patreon. I don't need Patreon. I need you. I need your support. So that $20, that $25 a month, would you buy me a sandwich? Would you hang out and have lunch and buy me a couple of beers or whatever? Don't worry about that. Just put it into PayPal. And I promise I'm not going to be getting rich doing this. It's a way to help me get out on the road and put gas in the tank. And look, let me go do what I do so you all can enjoy the other stories that come out of it. All right. Enough of me telling you about how we fund the show and everything. BreakItDownShow.com. Always good. Always good. And always looking forward to what's coming up next. I'm taking a bit of a break, so we're going to be on podcasts like production mode. We're just going to send out podcasts. So I won't be doing any YouTube things for a couple of days because I've got to slow down and take a little bit of a break and work on some video production stuff. So I will be back in about a week. And do not worry, you're not going to miss anything. We have a bunch of great shows lined up, more stuff on nature, more stuff on books. Everybody have a great weekend. It's my weekend starting right now. And I will talk to you all in about a week. All right, everybody, take care. Thank you for supporting the Break It Down Show.